Thank you for joining the City of Kingston's Common Council at our special Housing Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, June 18th. My name is Andrea Schott, the Council President and organizer for our virtual meetings. Before we begin, we would like to go over a few guidelines to help us navigate the system as efficiently and respectfully as possible. We ask that members of the public and press remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting. As organizer, I reserve the right to mute anyone who unmutes themselves. Council members and city staff and guests will control their own mute button. Good practice would be to mute yourself if you are not speaking to avoid background noise and feedback. If a council member, staff, or guest wish to speak, they will raise their hands. The chairperson will call on them before they speak by stating their name clearly for our audio listeners. All of our meetings are recorded. Both video and written transcriptions will be made available to the public on the city's website. Although we will not have public speaking tonight, you can submit written comments to the City of Kingston Clerk, Elisa Tinty, at emtinty@kingston-ny.gov, or by dropping them off at the drop box located outside the side door of City Hall. We also encourage you to reach out to committee chairs or your ward's representative at any time. If you have any audio issues, send a text message to the following number, 845-594-6120. Be aware that phone calls will not be answered during the meeting. The number to text is 845-594-6120. As the organizer for today's meeting, I reserve the right to lock and pause the meeting to eject anyone who has behaved inappropriately. Lastly, at tonight's meeting, we have in attendance Chairman Alderman Rennie Scott Childress, Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch, and Alderman Don Tollerman. Thank you for your patience during these difficult times, and on behalf of the Common Council, I wish you and your family good health, and I now turn the floor to Chair Scott Childress. Rennie, unmute yourself. Rennie. Hold on.
For breakfast, I like to eat. Oh, wait, what? So, thank you for joining us tonight. We are continuing with our series of discussions with different members of the community on issues relating to housing. We've had a wide variety of folks over the last month and a half, 2 months that we've been meeting on a regular basis. We look very much forward to having actual face-to-face meetings here coming up soon. One of the issues that we are focusing closely on is short-term rental regulation, the potential for these. We will be announcing soon a public forum on this. So if you're concerned or have questions about short-term rentals and the way that they are regulated or not, we will be doing this closely here in the near future. We also will be talking a lot in the upcoming weeks about the problem of evictions. We are reaching the end of some of the protections against eviction, and so we're very concerned about a wave of evictions here in Kingston. We're looking at different kinds of sources, different approaches, and so anybody who has any ideas, of course, if anybody has any expertise or ideas about how to address this problem, we are all ears. So with that said, tonight we've got two visitors. We're very happy to have guests with us. The first is going to be Rashida Tyler, who wears many hats. Tonight she's here as a member of the Real Kingston Tenants Union. And she has also been working with members of the county government to develop a robust approach to our housing questions. When Rashida's done, I will then introduce Kwame Holmes and his work, and we'll be looking at some of the research that he and his students have done over the past semester. So with that, Rashida, are you actually here?
Hi, Renee, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can't see you, though.
I believe Kwame was actually supposed to present first.
Okay. Is that what we decided?
I think so, right, Kwame?
Oh, okay. Then I've given you your introduction. So I'll introduce Kwame then. Sorry about that. So Kwame Holmes is a professor at Bard College. He has been studying with his students the geographical dispersion of people who own rental properties here in Kingston. And he's going to give us a presentation of the results of that research tonight. We look very much forward to it. So Kwame, thank you for being here, and take the stage.
Thank you so much to Rennie for the invitation to speak, and to the Housing Committee and the Common Council as a whole. I wonder about sharing my screen. I've never used GoTo before.
Sure. You'll see the 4 circles on the bottom of your screen, the mic, the camera, and then the one next to it on the right, it says screen.
Yeah. I'll share.
Press that button and you could share your screen.
All right. Open. Looks like I have to have a little chat with my laptop about GoTo to do certain things. One moment. Okay. Okay, it's telling me I have to restart GoTo. I apologize, but we'll be back in a moment.
Well, while we're waiting for Kwame then, Don and Michelle, do we want to talk about a time for having the forum for discussing short-term regulation?
All right. I think.
Never mind. Unless?
Still not allowing me to share my screen.
Let me just see if there's anything on my end.
Yeah, it says ask the organizer to make you presenter.
Yeah, you are presenter. Oh, because you're a different person now.
It's no worries.
Okay. Test that now, please. Should be good. It's your patience, everybody.
Until it's quiet.
Clearly the politics of expectation.
All right. Still, it tells me now try to be presenter. I think now it will allow you to make
which one you are. So hold on.
Yeah. PowerPoint is still worth it, you guys. Can't even tell you.
All right, test this one.
It's allowing me. Yep, it's allowing me.
That you?
Yes, that's me. Okay.
I see it now.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I want to begin by acknowledging that while I sit here in Cottikill, New York, and you may sit here in Kingston or some other place with a relatively new name, that we're all very likely sitting on ancestral Lenape land. And that's an important history to keep in the front of our mind, because their dispossession was very much driven by the same economic and social forces that are driving the vulnerability to eviction and housing precarity in Kingston in the present day. The Housing Justice Lab is a new initiative within the Human Rights Program at Bard College. And in its infancy, and it's been really raised by a really lovely village that I want to acknowledge before I get into our work. First is Cammie Jones, who helps to run the Engaged Liberal Arts and Sciences program at Bard, and who was an incredible support system, linking me with community partners like Rashida Tyler earlier in the year. Eli Dwecker, who's the chair of Environmental and Urban Studies, who co-hosted the class along with Tom Keenan and the Human Rights Project, and Tom's been a particularly supportive patron saint of mine at Bard, so I want to thank him for that. And also, I want to thank all of their administrative assistants, Danielle Rue, Christina Manello, and Eric Doherty. And then last but not least, the incredible students who not only took this course, but survived it amidst COVID-19 and did some incredible work that I'm so pleased to share with all of you this evening. Now, because of the pandemic, we didn't plan all the greatest photo ops. So we have this next photo, and I just want to apologize both to them and myself, and maybe all of you, but here they are. Here are some of them. But their names are Damaris Borden, Jenna Bosshart, Rachel Braver. Can I make this go away? Nope, I want to do that. Bruno Basseng, Maria Castillo, Brianna Estrada, Luna Flores Ramirez, Mary Klein, Ben Mulick, Issa Tenuta, Natalie Vergis, and Olivia Werby. And a few of those students, Rachel, Amari, Rachel, Audrey, Mary, and Elsa Ackerman from my Mapping Correspondence class, and Damaris have continued to work in the summer. So I just want to thank them all. And also Rashida Tyler, who took us on this great tour of the Midtown, snapped this photo for posterity, and who made our work really possible. So why did we start something called the Housing Justice Lab at Bard this year? The idea behind the initiative is to really transform how we talk about urban poverty and housing issues in small towns. Rather than focusing on the most affected populations and reciting stats around the relationship between rent and median income, we want to shine a light on homeowners and homeownership as an economic and cultural phenomenon which produces precarity, even at times inadvertently, but also by design. Examining housing issues from the lens of the homeowner can be actually rather difficult. In the urban landscape, poverty is hyper-visible and much more available to us for a range of reasons. We see people who board the bus as they do so, and that speaks to potentially the reliance upon those systems. We see people who might be unhoused walking along the highway. Our protections, our Bill of Rights protections against unreasonable search and seizure, our right to privacy, are all conceived with property ownership in mind. And we tend to not respect the privacy concerns of people who ask for aid. Our welfare system is quite investigative. And even people who've committed crimes of poverty, their names and photos are often printed in databases online or in newspapers. Right? And homeownership, by contrast, as an identity, is really hidden. I very recently learned that a friend of mine, who known for a while, just learned that he owned an apartment building in a different state and collects passive income from it every month. And it was the sort of thing that really shocked me at my lack of awareness around it, you know? And the people who I've met since I've moved to the Hudson Valley about a year ago, we share about our relationships, our deeply held political and spiritual beliefs, but not our statuses as homeowners. And all of that means that researching the question of how homeowners operate and where they are and what they're doing in the landscape is a great sort of cultural bias against that kind of work. Right? So we thought that we could try something different, and there's some real reasons why we should attend to homeowners, and particularly about why we should attend to landlords. This is a rental market in Kingston, New York, which is unbelievably tight. And it seems to be getting sort of more so every day. And what that means is that in a tight rental market, landlords, especially those which own a large number of buildings, can exert enormous influence and power over the lives of their tenants. And if they, for example, are negligent in maintenance and upkeep in a tight rental market, there's no real incentive for them to improve themselves. If people leave, then they're very unlikely to lose revenue. Someone else will take their place. And also, they can do things like price gouge. They can threaten people with eviction. if they don't adhere to what might be relatively unethical or even illegal demands. And there's very little recourse that we have in a tight rental market because of the way in which legislative bodies will literally ask the most vulnerable people, the tenants, to speak up and document evidence of their exigency. And if they're at risk of being evicted, they're much less likely to do so. So it's actually really important that we turn a light on homeowners and landlords rather than seeking renters as the kind of source of reform or of a political movement against reform. So those are the challenges that we face. So we thought we might try something a bit different. So we investigated home ownership in two ways. We looked at vacation rentals within Kingston as a whole, as well as Saugerties, though I won't get into all that today. And we looked at the nature of homeownership within one small parcel of land in the Midtown area of Kingston. Right, so I'm trying to move my... So yeah, first we identified a neighborhood area. And let's hope that this link will work. It has. So this is the neighborhood area that we did a kind of real comprehensive survey of property ownership within. It's bordered by Greenkill Avenue and St. James, and then Broadway and Pine Street. And Kingston residents, I think, will be really familiar with this part of town. We have the Stockade District to the north, and then the sort of Rondout, and of course in the Hudson area just beneath. But this is where we did our research, and we examined 481 pieces of property in this area. And how did we go about doing that? Well, we began with public records, right? Public records of sort of property tax information. And we downloaded these directly from the Ulster County website, right? These are all publicly available. At this point of the presentation, I made the decision to not include any names of homeowners, though we will talk about the names of individuals who own 3 or more properties within the area. But I wanted to just highlight that even as I prepared this presentation, I felt reticent about naming names. And we should really interrogate why that is. Like the kind of cultural prohibition against talking about homeownership in a transparent way even seems to sort of limit myself at first. So for each lot within the area, we downloaded one of these sort of property records. And then for each of the bolded categories, right, address, property class, city of the actual property, along with those of the owners, we put into a massive collectively made spreadsheet. And here is where the work would have been entirely impossible without the work of the class. So let me just show you very quickly. So yeah, our third step was geocoding. So all of those bolded categories became columns with our collective spreadsheet. And then their information became, each became a row, right? And all of that was instituted or put in by hand by myself and by students. We also gave coordinates to all of the properties. So this is where the owner's address was, right? Here the property's address was in latitude and longitude. And we also included a range of other questions that we asked the data. Was it owned by a single person? Was it owned by an LLC? Was it owned by a family, et cetera, et cetera? And those became really useful as we added nuance and further parsed the information to distinguish between people who owned property and were really sort of part of the community and who owned property and might have been a bit less so. Here again, this work, we did this for 481 pieces of property. And our goal with the Housing Lab is to continue that work for the entire Midtown area, for Uptown, for the Roundout, and eventually all of Kingston. So there can be kind of full transparency. And the other sort of argument, I think, for transparency is that because there are so many landowners who own large numbers of property, they're not the same thing as a state, but we think that they should be willing to talk about their activities in the way in which a public entity might also do so. All right, so the next step after the geocoding was posing questions to the data, right? And here are the questions that I'm going to be able to answer for you today. First, for which properties did the mailing address match the owner's address, right? And the thinking there was, if the mailing address matches the owner's address, then that's an owner who's deeply involved and implicated in their community. And that's something that we're really interested in. This is also working out in terms of gentrification, right? So those properties that are owned by people who live there or in the neighborhood, we think might be less likely to be sold to land speculators and could forestall gentrification, right? So we want to maybe try and keep those people in their homes. But we also had a question, for which properties did the mailing address not match the owner's address, right? And we don't, I want to say something very clearly here. We don't really know what that mismatch actually means, right? This is why I say we're at the very beginning of our work, and we want to really do some more investigation. We want to reach out to homeowners and talk about how do they relate to the community which they own if they don't live there. There can be all kinds of ways in which those connections can be nurturing and sustaining, but we simply want to find out, and we think it should be something that people talk about. So if the addresses don't match, where do non-resident owners live? And again, what does that tell us about their relationship to tenants in Midtown? How many properties are owned by limited liability corporations? And then we thought about, because not all LLCs are the same, but how many are owned by LLCs that control 2 or more properties, right? And also very fascinating, how many properties in the neighborhood are owned by people who are in real estate or who have development companies that own 3 or more properties. We call these mini empires because it takes quite a bit of cash and economic wherewithal to manage 3 properties in a parcel that is as relatively small as the one that we examined. And we think it points to probably much larger land holdings in the city and in the surrounding areas. All right, so let me just show you some of the answers to these questions. So I've uploaded our basically spreadsheets into ArcGIS Online. And so I can show you a couple of things. Here again is the neighborhood area. And I'm going to show you those houses in the area where the ownership matched the address of the property. The property owner's address matched the property's address. Right, so those are these green dots, but they represent not the majority of lots within the area. Right, there were 481 lots, and 275 of those are owned by people who don't live in the community. Right, and that are these black circles, and so. That's just really interesting. And, it's the beginning, the data offers the beginning of a question, What does this mean for the neighborhood's susceptibility to gentrification and to speculators? What does it mean for tenants' quality of life? And at this moment, when we're thinking about, the state violence and its impacts that are not just in the form of sort of, say, a shooting or a beating, but in the form of psychological trauma and emotional injury. The state of one's living conditions is a huge part of that. So there's, I think, important public health concerns to consider when we ask what is the significance of the dislocation between ownership and residency in this part of Kingston. Here are our mini empires. So these are properties that are owned by individuals who have 3 or more holdings. And I just want to say again that we know nothing about how these individuals relate to their tenants. We simply know that they own this much land. We really are hopeful that there can be work by the council, perhaps by this committee, that could really, and ourselves, to reach out to these folks and learn from their end how they relate to their tenants. And I think in nearly all cases, these are individuals who don't live in the community. Let me also talk to you about vacation rentals. I want to be mindful of time. So the vacation rental market in Kingston is, we were shocked at what we discovered. There are currently on Craigslist at the moment, 80 to 83, it sort of fluctuates week to week, available apartments that are listed on Craigslist for a year-long lease, or some, though many can be month to month, but for a year-long lease. There are, and I can just show you very quickly, over 100 vacation rentals on Airbnb and HomeAway.com. So there are more vacation rental and short-term rental listings in Kingston, we think, than there are current listings for a long-term rental. That's what I mean when I say it's a devastatingly tight rental market. And I think that should really give everyone pause. Here, I don't want to bore you with some of the methodology again. We had to estimate latitude and longitude because the websites often won't give you the exact address. And we think one thing that matters in Airbnb and vacation rental regulation could be greater transparency, not only about where these are, but who owns them. Here we have really no sense because often the people who are, if they're owned by an LLC or by an investment firm or by a bank, then there'll be someone who lets people in, but that's not the same person who owns the property. And just to give you a very quick illustration, what we did here was we calculated what the rent per month per room would be if you sort of took the unit in question, divided up the number of rooms, and also sort of looked at how much it would cost by the daily rate by 30. And you can see how profoundly expensive that rent becomes. $4,000 here, $2,950. And if you actually scroll all the way down, but I guess I can only scroll because it's my thing. We calculated the average for the average rent per room for Airbnbs in Kingston, which is over $4,000 a month. So if you're a landowner, you have no incentive to list your property for a long-term rental. You have none. And for example, right now there is one listing on Craigslist in the Stockade district, and it's $1,500 a month. So that is, the average is a 200% upcharge, 200% plus, maybe 50% upcharge from what they're charging for a whole house in the Stockade, right? So it's a devastating situation for people who are trying to find a permanent place to live. So it is after 6:30, and we had a lot of technical snafus. I want to be really mindful of the time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a lot more that we want to do with the lab. So just very quickly want to talk to you about our next steps. So we want to geocode each property parcel in the city of Kingston by the end of the year. We want to learn more about LLCs. We have some idea of the institutions behind LLCs, but there is much more to learn. And this map, which was made by Mary Klein, shows all the property within the area, and the red dots are those that are owned by LLCs, and the black dots are those that are owned by non-LLCs. Many were created in the last 12 months, so we want to figure out who those people are. And again, we want to reach out to landlords to see if they will talk to us about how they relate to tenants in the communities in which they own, especially if they don't own within the area. We want to push for ever more transparency in the Airbnb HomeAway vacation rental market. And so I just want to close again with just expressing my thanks to every single student who made this work possible. And I'm excited about that continuing in the future. Would love to be in partnership with people in Kingston who care about this project and who want to contribute to it. And also thank you to my patient husband who's listened to me be stressed about this presentation for the entire day. So thank you all so much.
Kwame, this is Rennie Scott Childers. I have one quick question. Are you also collecting data on how long the property owners have possessed their particular pieces of property?
You know, we haven't. No, that hasn't been something, and maybe, yeah, we haven't done that yet. But that sounds like it is really important given the kind of turnover that is associated with vacation. That's a really helpful metric. Rennie, I appreciate that.
Okay. Does anybody have questions? I can't see anybody at the moment because, I can see what I can do.
Don has happened and
Don has a question.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So you're focused on LLCs. Why is that? Do you have a presumption about LLC ownership that is what are your, why are you focused on that?
Well, for a couple of reasons, I think we're all very interested in understanding how real estate plays into the investment portfolios of like large investment banks, and maybe even multinational corporations. So, for example, one of the things that we looked at was LLCs that own 2 or more properties, and we found that one of those is a massive corporation which has holdings all over the country. And so again, if we're thinking about not that it's not home ownership in and of itself that is troubling, but a home ownership that's distant from the lived reality of neighbors and community members, then that's something that we want to draw attention to. And again, it's in the interest of simply transparency. We think that the private real estate market should be as transparent as the public sector.
Okay, just a thought for you. I own real estate and locally, and I have an LLC for any property just to reduce liability. I think it's a common practice in real estate. Doesn't mean that people don't live in the area, and doesn't mean that they're trying to not be transparent. It's just to protect themselves against litigation. What you say, I'm sure is true that there's multinational companies that own some of these properties. I'm sure that many of them are also owned by local people, even though they're LLCs. Just for your consideration.
Oh, and that's right. And one of the things, I went past it very quickly. There was one slide there where I say a dose of nuance, because we actually were really careful. For example, like an LLC that was run by AME Zion, we counted that as local residents. We didn't count we also, there are people in the community who owned 3 properties, but they lived in one, and they had owned the 2 that were right next to them. And so we counted, even though those addresses, like if you did it in a pure analytical way, there were addresses that were not where the owner didn't live there. We didn't count those as non-resident owners because it was like, obviously that person has bought in a different type of way. So it's not every LLC that we think is interesting. It's we're the ones that could be a potential problem. So yeah, I appreciate that.
If I can ask another question. So is your goal here to simply provide insight for the process, or do you have sort of a working theory that you're trying to, substantiate with data?
Well, I will say that at this point, because we've literally just begun, I don't think we have a theory other than that it's worthwhile. And we do hope that the information that is developed out of the lab will empower local electeds to approach the housing issue from the notion that it's co-produced by people who are owners and people who are renters, and that the solutions don't have to be limited to sort of treatment at the renter level, but there can be interventions that happen at the ownership level. And we hope that by studying home ownership, that will make it clearer how electeds can respond.
Okay. Michelle Hirsch, you've got a question?
Alderwoman Hirsch here. Thank you so much, Kwame. This was very interesting. I'm just curious if you're planning on expanding the boundaries of the study, or you're just going to stay your focus there.
We want to do the whole city. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to show you I'm happy to come back, but I'd love to show you the Airbnb map. I don't know if I can very quickly reshare my screen. But yeah, we want to do the
We've got to move on to Rashida, so.
Oh, yeah. We want to do the whole city, so that's absolutely our goal.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Will the committee have access to the data that you have so far? Is it proprietary or?
I'm happy to share, but I guess I hadn't thought that far. So let me think about it.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you to all your students. It seemed like a really great learning opportunity for them. So, thank you.
They're amazing.
Yes, thank you very much, Kwame. We appreciate this. Quite enlightening, a lot of stuff to chew on there. So now, with everyone's permission, we will move on to Rashida Tyler, who's the same person that I introduced earlier tonight. So, Rashida?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rennie. And thank you to the Housing Subcommittee for hosting us and for having us. And so thank you to Kwame. Getting to work with your class was amazing. And getting to work with you over the past semester has been really amazing too. So I look forward to seeing the rest of the results, and we do the whole city. I think it will give a lot of data that's necessary to create housing policies for the city. Great. Awesome. So let me see how to share my screen as well. Let's see.
It looks like you're sharing
Can
it,
everybody-
Rashida.
It looks like I'm sharing it. Okay, it's just very much smaller for me. Okay, so here with me today, I have Amanda Sistenstein. Is Amanda on the call?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. So we're going to be presenting together. We are members of the Ulster County Rapid Rehousing Working Group. It's a very long name. We're still in the process of actually trying to come up with something that really fits the description of what we do. So I'm going to move into presentation mode. Hopefully this will work. And let me know if you can see it on your screen.
Yes, looks good.
Okay. So I'm here with Amanda, and the Rapid Rehousing Working Group has been meeting really since, I'd say late May. And we're just a collection of local organizations, of community groups that actually work directly with the unhoused and with the housing insecure. And so we've, of course, seen an extra urgency in trying to find housing solutions since the pandemic has occurred. So let me move this wonderful mouse here. Okay, cool. So the Rapid Rehousing Working Group really began meeting in late May, and it sprung off from the Kingston Emergency Food Collaborative, where they began receiving requests from people who were unhoused in the community, and they were concerned actually about going into communal housing like a shelter or a boarding home because of the way COVID-19 was transmitted. And so the group came together to try to find some immediate resources, but it was really very difficult to find housing due to the fact of the pre-existing housing shortage and affordability crisis. So we take the state of housing that Ulster County was in, and then we, added an urgent health emergency to it. And it was almost impossible to find housing for individuals. One such individual, actually, he is 72, going on 73 years old. He is currently, and he has been living in his car since March. He has multiple health conditions, which places him in a high-risk category for contracting COVID and not having the best outcome. So he was very scared to go into communal housing. And so I know I personally advocated for him to get a hotel room or motel room through DSS, and he receives SSI, SSD, but the problem is that it's really not enough to sustain the rents that were being asked for, even for a studio or an efficiency apartment. Another individual, also very immunocompromised, at high risk for contracting COVID. He had been homeless since February, and he just reached out and asked for some help. He actually had some other cognitive impairment, and he didn't really know how to navigate DSS and the DSS system. So we went with him to DSS, the Royal Kingston Tenants Union, and advocated for him. He got a motel room where he's still at. He's scared to really go outside of his room because if he contracts COVID, again, not the best health outcome. So the crisis that we have in terms of housing was really was intensified by COVID and made more urgent. So the groups that came together were Catholic Charities, RUPCO, Family of Woodstock, the Kingston Land Trust, Citizen Action, the Real Kingston Tenants Union, Rise Up Kingston, and UIDN, the Ulster Immigrant Defense Network. And so what we wanted to try to do was craft a people's housing plan, craft something that would provide not only housing in the immediate sense, but also something that was more durable. And so the kind of point of partnering with people who are on the front lines, like Catholic Charities and RUPCO and Family, the providers, is that we are going to go through this with knowledge of the population that will be served and the needs of the populations that will be served. And so we kind of just got together in a brainstorming session, and from that began to emerge 3 different paths. So one of the paths, of course, was rapid rehousing. And so we really wanted to, I guess, emphasize like why we needed this path of rapid rehousing. Between October 2018 and September 2019, over 1,600 people in Ulster County experienced or were at risk of experiencing homelessness. 31% of Ulster County residents are renters. That's 21,319 people. And so Ulster County as of 2009, when there was a 3-county study that was conducted, required 6,624 additional affordable units at the 50%, 80%, 100%, and 120% levels to address the then emerging affordability gap. And so, that those the number of units were not constructed, were not created. And so in the 2019 Ulster County Rental Housing Survey actually found that the vacancy rate for non-subsidized housing was 3.51%, with just 34 of 960 units surveyed available. And so that rate was only 2.17% in Kingston. So circling back to Kwame's data and what his class is finding, it's validating the kind of experiences and what we're seeing on the ground. There's no place to live, especially if you fall in the lower income category. And so Ulster County actually ranks as the 5th highest in the state, counting the state. For cost-burdened renters, meaning that 55.1% of residents pay over the HUD standard of 30% of their monthly incomes to housing alone. Again, continuing why the urgency, like we've had this housing crisis, clearly since 2009 at least, if not earlier. But again, the pandemic has really placed an urgency on this. People cannot find safe and adequate and affordable housing. You cannot shelter in place if you have no place to shelter. So the COVID-19 pandemic has really wreaked havoc on, an already strained market, especially for those in the private rental market. We know that there is not enough public housing for our population or for those who need it. So when the statewide eviction moratorium that Governor Cuomo signed back in March is actually set to expire in August, and advocates and providers are very worried about a tsunami of evictions and potential displacement. And actually, recent studies show that those worries are not unfounded. So we have data from a U.S. Census household pulse survey, which started being conducted in April of 2020 and has been conducted every week, almost every week since then. So there are 6 weeks of data. So the numbers I'm quoting right now are from the 6th week of that survey. So it's at 342,000 renters, and by the way, this is for New York State. 342,494 renters that are earning less than $25,000 per year, and please excuse the typo, are experiencing housing insecurity or and to pay their rent. And this is leading up to the first week of June. And that means that 324,027 African Americans and of 508,500 Hispanic renters and 60,494 Asian renters could not or did not pay their rent leading in the first week of June. And also for the prior month, and 646,100 households with children under the 18 did not or could not pay the previous month's rent, and 50,604 renters under the age of 65, over the age of 65, did not pay rent. So this is actually, feeding into the impact that we're going to be seeing in the coming months. Where some of the people who were unable to pay rent were able to get that rent deferred. But we can start to see a breakdown of who gets, who's being able to do that. So of the 110,000 resident renters whose rent was deferred, 29,815 were 2 or more races. And also other races. So that's a very large category and really a catch-all. 16,999 were Hispanic, 7,302 were Asian, but just 2,539 were African American, while 53,846 were white. So this number means that the races, the categories that we see here, if they weren't able, the people who were not able to defer their rent and were not able to pay their rent, and if we look back at this number, you can see that 324,027 African Americans couldn't pay their rent, and 508,568 Hispanic renters could not pay their rent, but only basically 17,000 were afforded deferment, and only 2,500 or so African Americans were received deferment. The rest of those cases could be ending up in eviction court if there is not an actual intervention. And we're going to see again a stark breakdown of the evictions and displacement among those who are most vulnerable and have borne the brunt of the housing crisis. So the People's Housing Plan, we actually hope to address some of these issues. And we see the need again for a short-term, a midterm, and a long-term way to address housing. So the short term are efficiency cottages. These are AKA known as tiny homes. We found the terminology of tiny homes a little bit troublesome because that term is not necessarily conveying what we're trying to do. We want to give people a place to live. Sometimes when you see tiny homes, you see these luxury, constructs that are really, mini mansions. But we just want to give people a decent, sound place to live. Midterm solution is a rapid renovation of housing for, specifically, abandoned and vacant properties. And a long-term, solution, we're looking at policy. And so we needed the ability to not only do advocacy, but also have something real for people to go to. So I find it very important that we advocate for our policy and legislation, but oftentimes, after legislation passes, people are saying, well, I'm still in need. And so we really want to, walk while we chew gum, and we want to help give people something to live in while we're advocating for longer term change and more equitable housing solutions. So moving into the plan, efficiency cottages. So we reached out to Second Wind Cottages, which are near Ithaca, and they are a really great model for the kind of efficiency cottage model. And they started up about 9 years ago with 6 cottages. In their first year. They were all volunteer built. They didn't receive any government funding. And today they have 18 cottages, which serve a all-male population. But typically the population are those who cannot be housed in other locations. And I'll circle back to the individual who I was speaking of earlier, who remains unhoused. He would be considered one of the types of people who are unable to be housed. He doesn't have good credit. He has had substance abuse issues in the past. He has previous and prior evictions. Trying to find him accommodations has been next to near impossible. And so this kind of solution is, this is something that could possibly be a solution. Second Wind Cottages has been very magnanimous in giving us their business plan. They gave us the site design that you see here. They gave us a copy of their resident conduct policy, as well as their services that they have available. So we would like to replicate that model here in Kingston or the vicinity. And we wanted to get started as soon as this summer. constructing up to 10 cottages, if not more. If we can, that'd be great. And use that really as a proof of concept, because this is a place that we would hope that every municipality could possibly have among their spectrum of housing options, and really be a place that could serve those who are not being served by the current housing market. And so we wanted to start off with a population of single men who typically are more difficult to house than women and children, and veterans and the elderly. And so we find in housing that there's typically a cherry picking of populations that receive benefits. And I see it's getting on 7 o'clock. And how much time do we have?
Feel free to take another couple of minutes. I know Don Tollerman has to leave at 7, but I think, take another couple of minutes. I know I've got a couple of questions. I'm betting that Michelle Hirsch has some questions. So we'll look at going to 7:15, if that's okay with everybody. Yes. Okay, great. Okay,
Awesome.
Rashida.
Awesome. So we also plan to have on-site case management. So, our providers, Catholic Charities, Family of Woodstock, have said that they're very interested in this. And, between them, basically they're on board. And so they would be providing things that actually help people try to rehabilitate themselves and to get them into services. That's also something that Second Wind offers as well. The site will be located near public transportation and will offer temp to permanent residency. This is something where in Second Wind, there is no limit or time limit to how long people can stay. The hope and idea is that they would be able to move out on their own and be self-sufficient. But if they're not, that they do have this location to live. It's going to be community driven, meaning that it's going to be responsive to the community's housing needs, and also inclusive of volunteers and residents who want to assist with construction. As mentioned earlier, the first Second Wind cottages were actually built by the community. There were volunteers who came one Saturday a week, and they just learned how to build, and the cottages are beautiful, and they're still standing today. I don't think I'll have time to review this video, but I guess I can provide some links and you'll be able to see the video.
Yes, that would be great. All right. Thanks so much, Rashida. We appreciate that. Much clearer sense than of some of the crises that we're facing here.
Yeah,
Yep.
Just quickly, the plan actually includes another, which is rapid renovation of vacant properties. We have a model, which is the Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services. There's, again, they started with HUD funding. And so we wanted to actually plan to collaborate with the City of Kingston Land Bank, with the City of Kingston, and with local contractors and volunteers in trying to keep these homes permanently affordable. And then we also have the policy plank, and we have our models here, which are the Unlocking Doors project, which we hope to, that is landlord incentivization, and we hope to actually define affordability in Ulster County. And there's also the possibility we're looking at under consideration a residential vacancy tax or a second home tax. And Amanda, did you want to say anything about defining affordability in Ulster County?
I do. I have a few things about all the things, but keep it brief. So for affordable housing, we think it's really important to create a countywide definition. A few reasons why it needs to be countywide. So the IDA, who of course is in charge of giving out tax abatements to developments, a term that is often part of a deal for a pilot program for larger housing developments is often it usually hovers around 10% of the housing having to be qualified as affordable housing. The problem is, without a legal definition, there is no real standard that we can really hold anyone to. That also, of course, any advertising when any development advertises affordable housing, or when any nonprofits even, provide affordable housing, which often goes along with substantial public funding. There is no legal definition standard of affordable housing that has to be adhered to. So we have really been looking at the HUD definition, which is, anybody paying more than 30% of their income is rent burdened. So we're putting together that's appropriate for this area, a countywide affordable housing definition that can be used by various entities to really, it's kind of going back to the difference between something that is FDA organic or something that's labeled as all natural. Right now, affordable housing is meaningless because there is no standard there's like generally understood to be kind of standards or often recognized as kind of standards. What we need is an FDA organic certified housing definition, not this is all natural ingredients kind of labeling. So going on to also the policy legislation, which Rashida had touched on, we're also looking into a credit check ban, which is one of the hindrances that we have had in trying to house people. Sometimes even just going through a divorce can radically destroy your credit, making it difficult to find housing, which is already difficult enough when you are, going through a divorce and often vacating the house that you had owned. So policy legislation continued. As Rashida had mentioned, we're looking at kind of tenant-centered landlord incentivization, including things like tax abatements for habitability projects, making sure that these homes are safe and comfortable for the residents. Second home taxes, short-term rental taxes that would probably exclude hotels and motels, more be focused on Airbnbs, with the revenue going towards projects like rapid renovation and efficiency cottages. We're also looking at a vacancy tax and also a law that allows tenants to sue against harassment from landlords. So that's pretty much all I've got for today.
That's it so far.
All right. Sorry I interrupted you earlier. Are you done now?
Yep, we're done.
All right, great. Kingston actually has a residential vacancy fee, progressive fees if a house is not occupied. So you may want to look at that. But Michelle Hirsch, do you have questions?
Not necessarily questions regarding the information that she presented and the data. I'm just very well aware of it from my job with Family with Stock. But I just wanted to clarify, Rashida, the eviction moratorium, the full one sort of ends right on Monday, and courts open on Monday.
Yes. So we're going to
be a moratorium ends in August. So I mean, we can have a lot of evictions happening very quickly because of holdovers and people that were served eviction notices prior to COVID.
Yeah, it's going to be I don't want to say a disaster, but if we don't actually take action and act to help those who are going to be evicted, it's going to be really tragic.
Right. And I just, my understanding is, if someone had an eviction, a warrant served on them prior, it's just going to be even harder to find new housing now because of COVID. Even if COVID wasn't the reason that they were being evicted to begin with, COVID will make it harder to rehome them.
Absolutely. I think that people are going to stay homeless a lot longer, and that's going to put a strain on already stressed out resources for housing and for providers who are doing their best, but you can't get blood from a stone.
Right. Well, thank you for presenting this.
Thank you for having us.
So Rashida, I'm wondering, when you were talking about the efficiency cottages, I realized you were saying trying to get people to help build them and all. Do you have a sense of average cost for each of those units?
Yes, we do. So we're actually looking at the Second Wind budget, and it was $15,000 to $18,000 per cottage. But we do believe that we have a little bit of an advantage where Second Wind started and they didn't have this immediate buy-in. We've had a lot of community buy-in. We've had people who have actual construction experience who are willing to donate their time. We actually have located 2 parcels of land, which are graciously under consideration for donation. And so, you know, that is where we're at. We're almost leaps and bounds ahead of where Second Wind was when we started out. And actually the land, all we're doing right now is we're reviewing the zoning and we're seeing if that's feasible. But that offer is firm from one of our community partners, the Kingston Land Trust. And so, you know, right now, as it is, people in our committee, we're ready to pick up a hammer. We're ready to actually get started on it and do a community call and just start building, you know, housing.
Well, I'm not prying for information, but if any of those parcels are in the city of Kingston, let us know, and we can try to do everything we can to, if they need to be rezoned, to speed up the process. And then in terms of getting them built, are these the sort of things that local groups like Habitat for Humanity or Youth Build could contribute to constructing?
Yeah, so we've actually been in conversation with Youth Build, and we haven't gotten around to Habitat for Humanity, but we do want to include them as well. We've spoken to the Bruderhof, and we've spoken to UIDN, who have a number of members who are in construction and are willing to assist as well. So we have the skills here. And also Second Wind Cottages has made the offer. They have a project that they're doing this summer, but if that project is put on delay or deferred, they've offered to send us volunteers as well.
Okay, great. And then one last thing, we're talking about the potential surge of evictions and people being forced out of their homes. Is there, do you have a sense of how we might be able to get a clear understanding of when that wave might crest?
I don't know when the apex of it would be. You know, I can just, you know, see the kind of like it picking up and looking at that data. And I encourage everyone to go to the U.S. Census Household Pulse survey. And, you know, you can see the data that's there and the writing is on the wall.
Oh, sure. We understand that. But I mean, you know, we're the city, for example, is entering into a distinct budget crisis. And so some of these things have to do with, are there emergency monies we might be able to put to this? Is the sort of thing we need to put into our annual budget because we're getting ready to go into our budget process here in over the next couple of months. You know, so those are the kind of things that would be really helpful for us to in as much as we can, try to predict some of this so we know when to put resources where. But I understand it's a very difficult thing to predict.
Right. And a lot of it has to do with employment, when employment starts to pick back up, if employment will start to pick back up, and what other federal package comes down in terms of a further stimulus. I know right now there's $100 billion under consideration, and that still is being hashed out. Yeah. No, not just for Kingston, for the United States, for HUD. Yeah, I don't think Kingston needs quite that much.
We can use it. All right. So great. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to Kwame as well. There's a lot of fascinating information, a lot of very clear possibilities here, and we're excited to think about the possibility of the different plans that you all have been talking about. So as you go forward, Rashida, with these specific projects, I hope you will be in close touch with us so that we can do whatever we can through the Common Council, through the Kingston City government, as well as trying to develop this idea of incentives for landlords, because I think there's a great potential here in Kingston. We understand that there's several hundred properties right now that are not tenanted. And so if we could get those occupiable in the near future, this would be another place where seems like we could quickly ramp up the number of units. Might be temporary, but it would be the sort of thing that would help if there is a distinct surge of people who need housing. So there's a lot more we could talk about, but we are at 7:15 here. So I greatly appreciate everyone who's taken part. As always, if you have ideas, if you have concerns about the issues we're discussing, please get in touch with myself, with Michelle Hirsch or Don Tollerman, who are on the Special Housing Board, of course. Whatever ward of the city you live in, get in touch with your alderperson, and we will look forward to doing everything we can to reduce the harms that we are pretty clear coming down the pike here. All right. Thank you to everyone. Michelle, I think we'll just have to talk with Don separately to figure out the timing for the next, for the forum relating to short-term rentals. We'll also need to figure out a time for our next meeting. I don't know if 2 weeks from today works for everyone, but we'll talk about that, and we'll be making an announcement very soon. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everybody.